Welcome to the Moral Courage Podcast, lessons from the study of Rabbi Harold M. Schulweis of blessed memory, a podcast addressing today's trends and headlines through interviews and conversations with Jewish leaders, inspired by the works of Rabbi Harold M. Schulweis that make Jewish wisdom more accessible, inclusive, and relevant to today's complicated world. Our guests share their Jewish journeys and discuss how Rabbi Schulweis's wisdom provides inspiration and guidance to us today. Hosted by Rabbi Ari Averbach, Senior Rabbi at Temple Etz Chaim in Thousand Oaks, California, and board member of the Harold M. Schulweis Institute, an affiliate of Valley Beth Shalom in Encino, California.
Shalom, shalom. Welcome, everybody. Glad you're back for another episode of Moral Courage, where we dive into the life and times and career and rabbinate and writings of Rabbi Harold Schulweis, my teacher. And we're joined today by somebody who was like literally my teacher, literally was, you'll hear the story of how we met, Rabbi Joshua Hoffman, who worked very closely with Rabbi Schulweis and worked very closely with me before either of us were rabbis. We've known each other's families for a long time. And so we play a little bit of Jewish geography in there. Hear about his path to becoming a rabbi, his a lot of stories about our teacher, Rabbi Schulweis, and a little bit about his book about the holiness of doubt, questions from the Torah, and what he's doing now. So without further ado, here is my conversation with Rabbi Joshua Hoffman on moral courage. Rabbi Joshua Hoffman, I'm so happy to see you. I'm sorry that it takes a podcast for us to get some real FaceTime together.
Rabbi Ari, this is the best opportunity for us to connect. The last time that we connected was with written word. So to see you face to face and to hear your words coming from your mouth is a blessing. Thank you.
That's so nice. Just to give some context, I feel like I've always known you. I do remember that when I was a TA in a religious school for a synagogue that no longer exists, when I was in middle school, you were the teacher, and I got
you went there.
I know. And so that was the beginning. And then when I was thinking about rabbinical school, you were there. And and as a rabbi, when I was at VBS as a kid, like not as a kid, as a young adult, you were there. And I just felt like you've always been a teacher and rabbinic presence in my life. I'm really grateful for that.
Thank you so much. And since you went so deep and brought back a flood of memories, I'm thinking about Sammy Averbach, who this was like long time ago. And shortly after, I think that you were in my Hebrew school class when neither of us even thought about the idea of becoming a rabbi. Right. And Sammy Averbach went around, and when people introduced themselves, they introduced themselves with their favorite color. And I'd never, ever heard a person respond with the answer clear. And I thought that was like, from then I knew that like the Averbach children were special. And I had a very special connection with your sister Zavi as well, who was my TA at another point in time. So the idea that I have been surrounded, enveloped in the loving presence and the wisdom of the Averbach family for now upwards of 30 years, my friend, is just pretty darn extraordinary. And yes, it is. It's a gift. It's a gift that we know each other in so many ways, that we are also kind of like student machatanim, because your mother-in-law is one of my most beloved students of all. And I hope that she is quelling when she gets a name drop here for being a part of this podcast.
Oh, hello, Barbara. That's so nice. Yeah, it's part of growing up in this community, as we know each other. And I think there's some thought out there like that synagogues or rabbis are rivals of some sort. Whenever anybody brings up a rabbi's name, I try to say how much I appreciate that rabbi. Just so they know, like, we're all on the same team. We all work together. I talk to other local rabbis and faraway rabbis. We like each other. We happen to really like each other. And we turn to each other in times of trouble or need, and we share so much. Oh, wait, so I didn't know when we worked together, when I was the TA, you said you weren't yet thinking of becoming a rabbi. What was your path to being a rabbi?
I think actually by the time that I was in the Hebrew school world and moving towards education, the idea of becoming a rabbi was starting to come into focus. But I went to graduate school and received a master's in education before I went into rabbinic school. And the whole path for me started when I went to Israel the first time, when I was about 20, 1992. And there I was on the streets of Jerusalem. It was long before the light rail paved its way through Jaffa Street down in Kikar Tzion. And I had this like profound awareness at that moment. I was there before Birthright. I was on a college trip, and I just had this incredible connection that I belong to the Jewish people and they belong to me. And that sense of belonging really has animated not only my professional journey and my identity as a rabbi, but also it really does bring us into focus about how incredibly meaningful it was to work with someone like Harold Schulweis, who I think embodied the sense of belonging connection in a way that was so profound and so embodied and so deep that I didn't even know that the connection that I had could be as meaningful as it was until I was able to sit at his feet and learn from him and understand that. So it was kind of with that sort of emphasis of feeling a sense of belonging that I came back after my undergraduate studies. I went to the Master's in Education program at the University of Judaism, and then I was teaching Hebrew school with the illustrious, the most incredible coordinator of afternoon religious school programming, Ms. Neely Ziv, who we also have just tremendous fond memories of. She was a hero and a legend, literally a hero. I think she was an award-winning educating programmer for creating the Heroes program at Valley Beth Shalom under the tutelage of Harold Schulweis. This is also 35 years ago. And she was then the education director at Beth Haverim in Thousand Oaks, where you were living. And that's how we connected. And so I was so very fortunate once I kind of made this decision, this courageous and faithful leap, that I wanted to pursue what it really meant to be a part of the Jewish people, to belong to the Jewish people, and to have them belong to me. That was all of a sudden enveloped with just a wide array of people that had this incredibly deep and meaningful connection to their sense of purpose in the world. And I felt like if these are people that can live life on purpose, then I want to do that too. And that's kind of what got me into the rabbinate, because I figured that not only could I do that for myself, could I live a life of purpose, but I could also find within me the messages that I think would be valuable to share with others and hopefully inspire them to live a life of meaning as well.
Right. Clearly you have. What was it like working with Rabbi Schulweis? Because when I was a kid, he was God, right? Him on the bima, he didn't know anybody. I mean, I'm sure he knew people's names, but like we didn't think of him as like a person who would know names. He was on the bima and he was a presence and he used big words and he spoke and pounded on the podium. But you were in meetings with him.
It was so humbling, because the first time that I met him, which was really after a conclusion of some preliminary meetings with the leadership of the Valley Beth Shalom community, with the senior rabbi, Rabbi Ed Feinstein. He actually wasn't the senior rabbi at the time, but he was about to become the senior rabbi. And I went into Rabbi Schulweis's office, and he had, if you remember his office, he had on his desk this thing that somebody must have made him, and it said chashuv, or it was an imperative for those who like Hebrew. It could also be read as chashov, and chashov in Hebrew means to think, or it could be chashuv, which means it's important. So to meet somebody who kind of like looked at everything in his life as it had that kind of like profound value was intimidating. So I remember going to his office and sitting down and saying, "Hi, pleased to read you." And that was like, I mean, it literally slipped out of my mouth, and he kind of chuckled. And I'm glad that he chuckled, because I knew that was an opportunity for us to create a relationship that wasn't something that was at least experienced as one would experience a person of authority and a person of great wisdom in their youth, but actually as a potential colleague. And what does it mean to really be sitting in the presence of somebody that you embrace as a colleague? And what a privilege it was. It was the most precious gift that I had received in my life, to have the opportunity to work with both Rabbi Schulweis and Rabbi Feinstein in those early years. It was the greatest years of my life, to be able to sit and laugh and think and ideate and to create and to wrestle and to challenge with all of the complexities of what it meant to be a leader in a modern American synagogue. And I think that I got the privilege of really being the beneficiary of his greatness in the twilight of his career. When you're talking about a luminary, the twilight is not a dimming light, because it was after 2 years that he actually became, I think, even more well-known for initiating the Jewish World Watch program. And he had a bunch of other books that he still had yet to write and share with the world. So being in his presence was on the one hand in awe, and the other one was we were like collaborative. When they formed the Schulweis Institute, I had the opportunity to kind of pitch the Institute a program. And it was Rabbi Schulweis that came into my office and said, okay, here's how you're going to talk to them. And here's how you're going to ask for the money. And I thought that was like some of the best professional advice that I could get. It happened to be that like he was helping me talk to people that wanted to help make his name great. So, but nonetheless, he was like so invested in doing the good work that he wanted to mentor me as well.
But I mean, you have this idea of ideating, of thinking, of brainstorming with him. And at the same time, like being colleagues, there's also the everyday business. Do we try this program? Why didn't it work last time? What made it work that time before? Who's calling this person who just had surgery? Was he part of that in 2003, 2005? Was he part of those conversations as well? Or that was for the other rabbis, and his job was to sit in his office and think?
When we study deeply Rabbi Schulweis and his historical context, the profile of the rabbi was a very different profile than the senior rabbi of the congregation at the time, Rabbi Feinstein, and even me as a young rabbi, kind of like learning from these two luminaries. And so the idea that when we did ideate, but it wasn't necessarily about like, what Shabbat program should we have, or what should we do on Rosh Hashanah? Actually, there were a lot of times, because I was the junior rabbi, very much the junior rabbi, I had a lot of time in which I accompanied Rabbi Schulweis wherever he was present. So I often sat next to him on the pulpit on Shabbat. I often sat next to him on the pulpit for the high holidays. I distinctly remember this was kind of like one of those things that I know for sure it would have never been created in the time that I was ordained as a rabbi, because it was such a throwback from a different time and era, but it was still part of the ethos of Valley Beth Shalom, and that was the holiday of Simchat Torah. So in the synagogue, you had this like room that could seat 1,500 people, and it was these pews that were like nailed into the ground, bolted into the ground. Yeah. And the whole idea of Simchat Torah is that you take the Torahs and you dance and the music is playing, and it's kind of like chaotic and wonderful. But if you have 750 people sitting in this room in an auditorium, it's a totally different kind of experience. And he would call up these unbelievable musicians. I remember the trombone player. There was a trombone player. He was like a world-class trombone musician. And he came to play music for the Simchat Torah program at Valley Beth Shalom on that evening of Simchat Torah. I was kind of like, stunned, because it was so hard to get the people up and out of their seats and to dance. And yet the music was like so amazing. So it was like a concert. And I would think that like, this is all to say that the programmatic agenda of the synagogue, as shaped by him from a very particular historical context, was totally a success. And it was also at that time that we were really experiencing a cataclysmic transition of the way that the Jewish community was organizing itself and orienting itself. It had been building up in the middle of the 1980s and really kind of culminated in the 1990s. And by the time that I arrived in the early 2000s, so, we're talking about a good 15 years of this kind of formation, that by that time, all of the kind of like vestiges of the way that it was done before were not having the same kind of impact. Right. And so ideation was different. And there were a lot of wonderful conversations that were reflective from Rabbi Schulweis. They were sort of like, I would not know exactly what to do in this situation kind of conversations. And then it was the like, how do we take these unbelievable ideas that you have formulated and that you've been sharing for the past 40 years of your rabbinate? How do we make sure that those are continued on and shared in a meaningful way. And I think that was, whether implicitly or at times explicitly, the goal. And really, without platitudes, but with all seriousness, I think that what the Schulweis Institute did, its contribution was to help take those timeless ideas and to ensure that they would have longevity and they would have an opportunity to be manifest in different environments that we're going to need to change with the times.
I'll see if I remember my two questions, which are about how you're using this now. One is what wisdom, because the times are changing again so drastically right now compared to where we were 20 years ago. In every aspect of life, Jewish life, American life, Israel life, all of these things, what are the lessons that we learned from Rabbi Schulweis back then that are applicable today that we can take this and in this cultural shift, use those? And then the other one is kind of similarly is you're now leading a school. What are the things that you want to make sure the next generation is learning about somebody who we saw as a luminary, but maybe they didn't know him, they didn't read his books, the name doesn't carry the weight that it did with us?
So I was thinking about this deeply because I think that, as a figure at a very particular moment in history, there were a lot of people that claimed Rabbi Schulweis as their ideological mentor, their philosophical mentor, their programmatic mentor, their spiritual mentor. And, really, it was fascinating because I actually saw this play in real time. There was an Orthodox rabbi in the community whose name I don't remember. He was the Rabbi of Mogen David in Los Angeles. And when he learned that I was one of the rabbis at Valley Beth Shalom, he was like, that's Schulweis's place, right? And then he made a joke. He was like, because its back end is near the street called Haskell. Haskell is the name of the street where Valley Beth Shalom is. In Hebrew, the word for to see or to perceive is Haskel. And he's like, that Schulweis in Haskel, he is such a great rabbi. And I was like, wow. Even the Orthodox lay claim to him. And the Reform Jews lay claim to him. And the Reconstructionists, if you hear so many people that say, Rabbi Schulweis was the Talmid Muvchak. He was the prize student of Mordechai Kaplan. Well, if you listen very carefully, he was also the prize student of all of his professors. It's so funny. Sorry, now I'm going to digress for a second. So in the offices at a particular point in time, there were so many files that Rabbi Schulweis had of all of his writings and stuff that they weren't even contained in this big, huge office that he had. So he had a bathroom. There was a private bathroom. And you walk into the bathroom. I can't believe I'm telling this story. It's great. It's about the bathroom. It's in the bathroom and there were boxes. And in the boxes, were these wonderful artifacts. So in the bathroom was a paper that Rabbi Schulweis wrote for Martin Buber.
Wow.
And on the piece of paper was the grade. Now, I was maybe just looking for a book when I was in the bathroom. I happened to see this. And you know what? He got a B. What? He got a B. Little did we know that a B was a really good grade in Martin Buber's class. Okay. So the idea that this isn't answering your question. I told you it's a digression, but let me bring it back because when you think about all the people that claim Rabbi Schulweis, then you understand what does it mean of someone with such clear understanding of the way that he saw the world, but also such a beautiful articulation, big words and all, about the way the world is and the way the world ought to be, that the lessons are so very easily seen. I really think that, yes, I do run a school now that trains people to become rabbis, cantors, and chaplains. I'm privileged to say that two of the cantors that are alumni of this school have served as the senior cantors of Valley Beth Shalom. And I know that he would have been proud. I know he was proud of the first alum, Cantor Phil Barron, who recently retired from the position. And I know that for sure he would be so very proud of Cantor Jackie Rafi. So what does it mean to have, there are so many seminaries out there. There's a Jewish Theological Seminary. There's a Zeeler School of Rabbinic Studies where you and I were ordained. There's the Hebrew College. There's the Yeshiva University. There's all of these incredible schools. And I don't mean to overlook any of them. But in all of these incredible schools that are training rabbis, cantors, chaplains, and Jewish educators, why is there a need for another school? And something about this school, which is personally why I feel connected to it, and I feel impassioned by the work that I think is necessary to ensure the sustainability, and so that the Torah that comes out of this school thrives in the world, is a couple things. One is that it isn't really tied to any particular ideology, right? And it's more than just saying just Jewish. It's simply saying we have a responsibility to take the best wisdom that Judaism has carried forward from generation to generation, to make sense of it, and to bring it to a community that is starving for connection. And without the limitations that sometimes ideological foundations can provide, walking in the door, being a part of a building that has a certain culture and a certain way of practicing and behavior, that is a limitation that I know that Rabbi Schulweis was so emphatic to break down the walls. Again, you would hear everyone claim Rabbi Schulweis as their ideological leader, and that's because he was able to work within and between all of those different identities. So I think that that's part one of the answer to the school, right? Which is what are the lessons that are like playing themselves out in this school? It's exactly that. It's exactly that. When you think about, don't ask, one of a couple of great Rabbi Schulweis turns, right? One was, don't ask, what is God? Talk about what your behavior is that is godly. Right. And by shifting to godliness and teaching that and imbuing people with a spirituality that they can make a difference, that they can be the agents of change, that they can live a life of meaning and purpose by actually creating that purposeful life around them. I think that's one of the great teachings that he and others, but significantly he for me, and I think for so many of us listening to this podcast, that it is it's located in his genius in that respect. The second question, I think I answered the first question. Let me get to the second question.
Right.
So now, what do we do? And this is the sort of like the trajectory, because training rabbis, training cantors, training chaplains, training people who consider themselves to be Jewish spiritual leaders, the expectation is different. You and I were trained, and many of our colleagues of the same time frame of our schools, we were trained with a very specific purpose. We had to be everything to everybody, and we had to be entertaining, and we had to be charismatic, all the same. And you see it on the faces of our colleagues who have been doing this for a very long time, that the expectations are just unrealistic. We have to be as smart as Schulweis. We have to be as ingenious as Schulweis. We have to be as eloquent as Schulweis. We have to be as pastorally sensitive as Schulweis. And, I don't say this with resentment. I think, what a privilege to be in his presence, but we're just in a different time frame and milieu. And I don't think that people expect the same thing from their clergy. I think they want to feel heard. They want to feel cared. They want to know that this great tradition has something to say to them that means something to them. Yeah. And they need translators. They need people that can take the vastness of Jewish wisdom and history and experience, and they can interpret it in such a way that makes people feel like they're connected and they belong. And I'm really interested in that, and building a school of people to do that, not to go into some of the models of Jewish communal leadership that I think we are worthy inheritors of. And I think there's a lot of good work to do in that respect.
Do you think that Judaism today, or always, needs transformation? You think we ever hit status quo when we go, this is what it's supposed to be? Or you think that we're always going, okay, we hit that peak, and now we got to figure out how to talk to this new generation who speaks a different language than we did? And part of it is could he have been Rabbi Schulweis coming out of post-Holocaust JTS and going into the suburbs, being a theologian? You have to rethink what God is, because we had centuries of this overlay of a Greek God, right? This almighty, all-powerful God will heal you. And Rabbi Schulweis gave a voice, gave understanding and seichel, gave heskel to this idea of don't look to God to be this invisible force that cures you as you're smoking a cigarette, I think is one of his lines that he uses. But how is it through me? How do we understand that God works through us, and we are a partner with God. And I had that come out a generation before. I don't know if it would have been understood as much, but post-Holocaust America world, it all of a sudden clicked and made sense. And so here we are now, 100 years after he was born, kind of still, for me, still living in that theology, which is what I need and what I think my people need, because I listen to so many other theologians who are like, oh, God, take the wheel kind of thing. God will provide. And you go, how do you explain tragedy in our life? And so with him, with Harold Kushner, there was a generation of people who came out of, it was only JTS back then, who redefined it for us. And I wonder, like, what's going to come out of the world today? How do you, as the head of a school that's focused on making Jewish leaders who serve as agents of transformation, how do we keep it alive, not just with his theology, which still works, but also how do you bring it to this next generation? How do we adapt it to a world with AI? Just the one thing that's on my mind right now. Right. I don't have, it's like, there's not an answer or an easy answer.
Well, I love, yeah. I'm actually like, I'm journeying on your musings. Like you were sort of like on this wonderful windy path of trying to figure this out. And I think in the middle of it, you answered the first part of your question, which is like, could Schulweis be relevant today in 2025? And I think you answered that already, because you said clearly the principles that he founded on the need to translate the wisdom of a tradition to a meaning, a community of people seeking meaning. That was something that he really took on seriously. Now, would it have been with the same tools? I think that's where a lot of people kind of get hung up, because the tool that was the most powerful and impactful tool of 1970s was the sermon. And the idea that you would get up on a pulpit, and literally in that congregation, it was 15 feet above the floor, so that you would literally be looking up to this voice. And the concept of that was that, like, there's truth embodied in this one person. And the one person is saying, I am here to tell you it's not about me. That's the irony of it, is that everybody was like, you are saying so much great stuff. You are amazing. And he was like, it is so not about me. It's about you. And you say, so if you want to understand where God lives in your life, it's through you, right? As you had mentioned. Yeah. And so therefore, if you want to be a person who feels a sense of connection to whatever source of divinity or a sense of divinity that you interpret meaning from, then it's gonna, I'm here as a facilitator of that. And I think there was an element of him that was really humble in that respect. I don't know if that's always the way that he was characterized, but I really found in him, personally, this kind of humility. Not that the humility of I'm a lower than you kind of person. On the contrary, this thing that I am sharing with us is so important to her. It's not about me as the agent of sending it through. And I would just say, as a funny little aside, like, for those who had the privilege of seeing him deliver a sermon on the high holidays, he was like a lion in the cage about to be released. Like, for him, giving the best sermon was the kind of like pinnacle of his life. We would always joke that, like, his favorite thing would have been like a lightning bolt would have come out of the sky and struck him on the pulpit as he was holding on to the microphone, as he was really going to give it to the congregation at that particular moment. And it was going to be like a really great spectacle. Like, that was the success. And I think that that's not the success of today. It doesn't mean that there isn't a place for that. It doesn't mean that we're not seeking moral clarity. It's not that we don't need loud voices, but even more than with moral clarity, to be able to send out into the world, there is a better way. And so your question is, does Judaism ever reach a pinnacle of some kind of, standard of good enough? I don't think so. I don't think there's ever such a thing as good enough. I actually think that that's why Schulweis never was really kind of a messianic kind of Jew, right? I don't even think that he ever thought about like an end of the world kind of thing. I don't even think that he thought that God was going to be a redemptive force that would someday come and like save all of, like, that was not salvation in his thinking. It's the idea that like human becoming, human belonging, human believing, that was the path.
Yeah.
One of his favorite things that he used to say is, because, you know, there's other part of him that I don't know if you've brought up on your podcast, but it's such a great part of the stuff, is that, you know, he lit our minds on fire, but he also lit our hearts on fire. And his poetry was really, really kind of beautiful. And he was always fond of saying, it was kind of an adaptation of a quote from George Santayana, the 20th century philosopher. And he would say, prayer is poetry believed in. And I loved that quote. And I use that all the time. And I love it because I think it sort of gets to the heart of who he was. It's not just simply the words on the page. It's not the sermon that was being given, the words and the lyricism. Like, you know, he had just like words that I think he was making up because they were so amazing, right? It wasn't the words. It was always about the end. It was always about the believing in part. And I think I just like, that's the piece. That's the humility.
There's a story, I think it's a story about Kaplan, although I get Kaplan and Heschel mixed up with all the stories of them back then. But Kaplan, Mordechai Kaplan, the rabbi of the 20th century, we can go more into him. But he was with JTS students, the story goes, and they were davening something. I mean, in my mind, it was Birkat Hamazon, the blessing after meals. And they get to a line that's like, you know, something problematic. Right. I was young and now I'm old, and I never saw a righteous person in need. And Rabbi Kaplan stopped and goes, do you believe this? Do you believe that there are no righteous people who are in need? And there was like a hubbub among the rabbinical students. We're like, how do we respond to this? He goes, if you don't believe it, why would you say it? Like that, I mean, hearing that story over time, and that sticks with me, is and to say prayer is poetry that you believed in. If this doesn't mean anything to you, and Heschel also has a quote that's prayer is meaningless unless it's subversive. If it doesn't change your life, if you're not better walking out of the shul, you can't pray for peace, you can't pray for healing, and then do nothing about it. This is supposed to be something you believe in enough to remind yourself in shul or wherever you're praying, to then go take it to the streets. How do you teach a class on Rabbi Schulweis? Where would you start?
I think I think that it has to be a class in the modern American rabbinate, and I would make Rabbi Schulweis the pinnacle, the centerpiece of it, because I do think that, one, it's a historical context. And so understanding what were the things that the rabbis of that generation were talking about, and why you would say, well, here's what Schulweis did, and here's how he responded to this, and here how different is his response, or how innovative is his response compared to his colleagues of the particular moment. And I think that comparative measure is actually incredibly valuable, because I think that what you would get from that is you would get a sense that this was genius. So, for example, the need to have the Jewish world, and I wish that the voices would have reached traditional Judaism during his lifetime, to embrace the sexual identities of all members of the community, and to understand that like homosexuality was something that was to be embraced inside of the synagogue. He was ahead of the time, like 10 years. Before the rest of the world kind of even came together. Even the Reform movement was a little bit kind of hesitant to proclaim it so clearly. And I think that, you know, that kind of idea that he had these important ideas that needed to be brought to the world, and that they were brought in a particular historical context, is important. The second thing that I would also like add is the sort of defining what it meant to be a modern American rabbi. And I think I would be, as we've said earlier, you know, that there are parts that I would shed not a negative light, but a critical light, because I think that the expectations of what rabbis ought to be is really very much formed by the kinds of rabbis that were the most significant rabbis of the latter part of the 20th century. And the concept that they were just as an aside, right? Like we would have these gala events, and Rabbi Schulweis would pull out his violin. I don't know if he actually ever really knew how to play the violin at all. But he would do this shtick. He did this shtick. He would pull out the violin and he would describe it. And it was so unbelievably entertaining. He was an entertainer. He was a thinker. He was a pastor. He was a teacher. He was a brilliant sermonizer. He was an unbelievable organizer and programmatic genius. All of these things that he was. And it kind of left in the wake of, this pinnacle moment, a lot of people clamoring to sort of, I don't know, replicate that in some way. And that was all happening simultaneously as the world and its priorities, or, the Jewish community, perhaps particularly in its priorities of organizing itself and what its priorities are, is very much in flux right now, right? Like it post-World War II, as you talked about it, post-Holocaust, Jews were building stuff and they were coming together, and like they needed to belong. And, if you moved to the suburbs, the first place you went is the synagogue. That's just not how it is for us in our generation, our children's generation, and they didn't have day schools and they didn't have all the things that the institutions, they didn't have Camp Ramah when Rabbi Schulweis started to be a rabbi, right? They started to, but like it was all born out of the same need to feel a sense of belonging, to feel a sense of Americanness. One last piece, you got me going, is about AI, because you're right? So how does AI work in this story? So one thing that I've at least come to think is that I don't need to teach Torah like Rabbi Schulweis, meaning that like I don't need to figure out how I take his Torah and interpret it myself and teach it, because I can go to ChatGPT or Grok or Claudine or any of the other incredible platforms, and I could say, write me a sermon in the voice of Harold M. Schulweis on the subject of this, but give it a little bit of this 21st century flavor, and it will come out with a perfectly adequate, if not great, rendition of that. So it's not for want of information that we need here, but it's the heart. It's the heart of Harold Schulweis that we need. And I think it's the heart that is present in any generation, and why this is such a valuable contribution that we need to continue to perpetuate. Because it's just like that last thing, prayers, poetry believed in. You have to care. You have to care. You cannot presume that the words themselves will care for you. You cannot presume that the community itself will care for you. You have to be active and you have to take part. And we need moral voices with the kind of clarity that he had to do that kind of teaching. So I like my job, actually, because I want to train a whole generation just like him. But they don't have to be the sermonizers, and they don't have to know the Talmud like he did. And, and they don't have to learn how to play the violin or not like he did, but they definitely have to be authentically themselves. And that's who he was.
Thank you. I want to talk about your book for a little bit, just because you wrote this beautiful book called The Holiness of Doubt, and which it goes through so many of the questions, all the questions in the Torah. How did you come up with this? How did this come to you? Was it kind of expected that you're a rabbi, you write a book, or your wife's a rabbi, the two of you? I mean, how does this come to be?
I think I personally knew that I had, as the many tools that I had available to me in my own personal toolkit, the capacity to write something meaningfully. And so really it was kind of an emergence, really actually the year that Rabbi Schulweis passed in 2014. I was like flying on airplanes, doing lots of travel at the time for my involvement in some of the organizations that serve Jewish community nationally and internationally. And I was kind of like going through the Torah, and I stumbled on one of these questions. I mean, the question that I really stumbled on was right in the middle of the book of Exodus. It's in this whole book of laws. It's like, when this happens, you pay this amount of damage, and when that happens, you compensate it for this one. And right in the middle of it was the explanation that if a day laborer comes to your house, or they come to your farm, and they're going to work your land, and they give to you in pledge collateral their cloak, their jacket, so that you can guarantee that they don't take your food when they're working in your field. The law is you have to return the cloak or jacket to them at the end of the day. very good, wonderful. Sort of, it's an ethical law, and it's also sort of has a moral code to it, but it also has an economic underpinning to it as well. But then it goes further and it says, "In what else will he sleep?" It asks that question. In what else will he sleep? So I was kind of struck by that. I was stunned by that. So why does the Torah all of a sudden have to ask, like rhetorically, if that's what it is, like what else is he going to do? Like, why would that even be the need for this sacred text, which has a very clear, at least the way that we've understood it and received it, a very clear purpose for each and every letter in the text? Why would it use all of those letters to create that question? So that was kind of the impetus for me to say, hey, you know what? I think there's a bunch of other questions. And all of a sudden I started to catalog all of them, and I found that there's some 275 of them. And I thought that was like, kind of amazing. So what does it mean for a book that its purpose is to promote a sense of certainty in the world, to promote a sense of rootedness and identity, so that one could have a sense of themselves in order to confront a world with so much complexity? Why would it be riddled with questions which are all about uncertainty? Like, now go back to that question. In what else would he sleep? The implication of that is you might be hard-headed. So you have to break yourself out of that hard-headedness because of your own self-preservation or the protection of your own property, it's not a bad thing to own your property. It's just that when you do it at the consequence of another person's comfort, that is morally wrong. So once I did all of that cataloging, I really kind of started to weave it together. And the book is just my like gloss. The idea is that, somebody reads the book and they find the questions and they're like, I want to ask the questions myself of this week's Torah portion. And maybe I see something else. And I really hope that it's much more of a tool for others to study, which is why I put in a whole bunch of lessons. So if you wanted to teach this and encourage other people to learn it. And that was really how the book came to be. And, I feel grateful that you said, rabbis have to write books. I don't think rabbis have to write books. I know far more rabbis that don't write books than those who do. And I was just privileged to have this one get to publication.
It's prominently on my bookshelf, both because I know you and I love you and it's nice to show off your stuff. And also because it's, as a rabbi, you go, what am I going to talk about this week? Right? I don't know if you know, Shabbat comes every single week.
Is that right? Wow.
Sometimes you get to like Friday, you go, oh my gosh, I had 3 funerals, 2 baby namings, board meeting. Who had time? And you go, here's a tool where I can go, okay, here's the parsha this week. Oh my gosh, what an angle that I hadn't seen before. Bolded, bullet pointed. It really helps. So thank you.
Well, thank you. That's a great compliment. Thank you.
One of the last questions that we go to on this podcast is, are you learning anything there? Is there a text that has been speaking to you, digging at you today, or maybe for decades that has helped direct you, or something you came across today that you go, never saw that line of prayer or Talmud before?
Not necessarily the surprise and wonder of discovery of a new text, although that does happen all the time. And I think it's the beauty of our tradition is that we turn it over and turn it over again, and there's always something new in it. I suppose actually it's the Aleinu prayer, actually in the Musaf service. So in the prayer service of Rosh Hashanah, there is this whole arc of thought. I think it's a thought piece. It's ironically in a prayer book, but it's really about the thought idea of God's presence in the world. It's called Malchuyot, and then God's attention on humanity, Zichronot, and then God's, I guess, call to action in Shofarot. And it's often a theme because Jews like numbers and play with all kinds of things that pair up so very well together. I love the ones that, that in Judaism, they say there's 3 things that are the most important thing. And the 4th one is the most important of all. Right. So whether the counting is one way or the other is mathematically correct is irrelevant. But what I'm thinking about is really it's actually an ideologically problematic prayer because it talks about the particularity of Judaism. God has chosen us from among all the other nations of the world, and because that their chosenness exists, there is no other one, and so therefore we are unique, and God is unique. And then once you peel the layer, the second paragraph, the second idea is really about a universal oneness. And that to me is kind of a very powerful thing. We prayed that, so we take that out of the Musaf prayers, and that became the end of our prayers whenever we finish a prayer service. And it's not just the melody, although sometimes I think the melody is why people like it so much and they sing it so loudly, right? Instead of it being the melody, it really is because it has this message. What's the one thing? What's the one thing that you believe is the connection to the ultimate oneness that exists? And compelling us to be mindful of, as we walk out the door, it's not what I'm grateful for. And it's not what I know about myself. It's the one thing that I'm responsible for. That's why the word is aleinu. It's upon us, right? It. What is the it there? It is us taking responsibility for the world. So what is the one thing that we're going to take responsibility for the world? And how are we going to make sure that we encourage it in others, that we see it in the world where it's to be found, and we also embody it in ourselves, and we hold ourselves accountable to it in case we falter along the way. And when we can kind of identify into those moments of oneness, we can really feel a profound sense of connection with all that is good in the world. And because the world is so very complicated and upsetting today, beyond any measure that I think has been recorded in decades. And I've heard people say, like, now is the time that there's a crisis. Now things are really the most important. It really is a hard time to be alive in this world. And yet there is more goodness out there waiting for us to connect it than ever before. And if we don't do our job, if we don't do the connecting, nobody will. And so that's my Aleinu prayer. And that's, I really feel inspired by Rabbi Schulweis by that, because I know that that's kind of where he was motivated in a lot of the things that he taught and he shared with the world. It's what I like to share with my students. It's what I hope is heard a little bit. And I appreciate you asking me to round out that question with this offering, and hope that it's something that inspires us all towards a better tomorrow.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And we end our services towards the end with Aleinu. So how nice to end this conversation with talk of Aleinu. Rabbi Joshua Hoffman, thank you so much for joining us on the Moral Courage podcast. It's nice to see your face, nice to hear your voice, nice to learn your Torah. Really appreciate you being here. Shana Tova, have a good day.
Rabbi Ari Averbach, may I add as well? Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for inviting me on to this podcast. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and wisdom and your Torah with me. And I really wish you great success in these coming weeks as you bring your community together and share with them the great Torah that you have to share.
Thank you so much for being part of this conversation with Rabbi Joshua Hoffman on moral courage and learning about Rabbi Schulweis. Looking forward to next time.
Thank you for listening to the Moral Courage podcast. We are produced by the Harold M. Schulweis Institute at Valley Beth Shalom, which supports these podcasts in addition to educational programs within Valley Beth Shalom, the Schulweis Library, changing exhibitions at the Liner Chapel at VBS, Jewish World Watch, and the Jewish Community Children's Choir. The Moral Courage podcast is hosted by Rabbi Ari Averbach. Our consulting producer is Esther Kostanowitz. Our technical producer is Eric Weiser. We are grateful for the support of the Institute and Haley Lazitsky-Weiser at Sadcon Productions. To learn more about Rabbi Schulweis or to make a donation to help support these podcasts, visit the Institute website at hmsi.info.